That was a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen. How feasible is it for Africa to unite? Why has that not happened yet? That is a question. And of course, forging a united bloc takes time, and it starts with economic integration and strategic capacity building. When the African Union members pledge to continue to speak with one voice and act collectively to promote the continent's common interests and positions in the international arena, they recognized that this was not an easy feat. Indeed, the Africa we want, or better still, a united Africa, the global powerhouse of the future, will not be built in a day. Though slow, there has been impressive progress in expanding its regional economic communities, countries' groupings designed to facilitate economic integration. We recall that in January 2021, the African Continental Free Trade Area entered into force with the hope that the African Continental Free Trade Area will help lift millions of Africans out of extreme poverty, thereby boosting growth, creating jobs and increasing incomes, all while spurring towards an even deeper integration. Until date, its effective implementation is yet to be felt on the African continent. Still no single passport, still no single currency, and of course little hopes that a single currency will come into force that meets all this. A united Africa, what is required to set the continent on course? Ladies and gentlemen, this is Talking Point. Stay with us. It's a new day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for always trusting your Pan-African channel for you, Media Africa, and of course taking our time to be with us on this edition of Talking Point, where we get to discuss matters affecting the African continent. And of course this day we shall be focusing in the feasibility of having a united Africa, where we ask ourselves the question, what is needed to set this agenda on course? And of course to evoke these talking points, or better still topic of discussion this day, ladies and gentlemen, we've been joined by Dr. Stanley FONGOD, who is joining us all the way from the US. Thank you immensely, sir, for taking out time to be with us this day.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for having me. Thanks to all of viewers and those streaming online for joining, and subsequently those who will be watching as well. And I hope that today we will be having a fruitful discussion as we try to look at the state of affairs in Africa.
Absolutely. It's all about trying to change the narrative, or better still, reshape the narrative across the African continent. We equally have been joined by Mr. FELIX ORWAKA, who is joining us all the way from Kenya in his capacity, of course, as the co-chair of Kenya Coalition on Youth Peace and Security. Greetings to you, sir. Thank you for joining us. Okay, meanwhile, Mr. Waka Felix will be joining us subsequently. We shall equally be getting the inside of Mr. Gilbert KIMBI, who is a marketing consultant, a specialist on African affairs. And now to deep dive into today's topic of discussion, I'll debut with you, Dr. Stanley FONGOD. Over time, we've evoked the feasibility of Africa, or having a united continent, and of course, it is of utmost importance that Africans get together in a bit to discuss the feasibility of having this, citing that solidarity is of utmost importance within the African continent in terms of its growth and progress. So now, Dr. FONGOD, in your understanding and capacity as a Pan-African, what do you understand by this dream of a united African continent?
I think that the dream is quite good, because this is the dream of our fathers. This is the dream of men like Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, and the list goes on. Julius Nyerere. These are the people, these are the dreams that they inherited, so that we can all together collectively as a continent not be subdivided into countries, which we were not originally, but become a bloc, become Africans, and literally interact with the world as Africans, not individual states within the continent of Africa. I think that this is needed. I think it's long overdue. And the unfortunate thing is that the African Union ideas and dreams, has not been, and what is espoused for, has not been realized. And as a result of that, we are dealing with a continent, that is fragmented, a continent that is known for wars, a continent whose mineral resources are being looted daily, a continent that cannot just get her act together. So we need a Pan-African front on the African continent to lead us into the 21st century. And I think that this is time. It is ripe. This is time. This generation needs to rise up and build for us a robust Africa, not the disjointed Africa that we have now.
Absolutely. It's all about conscientizing the African continent, especially the young generation, so that they get to think in the light, or say in the same vision as the forefathers of this great continent. Like you mentioned, the Julius Nyerere, Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, and a host of others. And now, in a bid to comprehend if Mr. ORWAKA is with us, please kindly proceed with what you understand by a unified continent and how feasible that is within the present-day context.
Yeah, thank you so much. Am I audible now?
Yeah, I can get you. Thank you.
Yes, thanks so much. So my apologies for the network interruption. My name is FELIX from Kenya. And let me just go straight to the point that a unified Africa is a continent that do not have the border which were created by our colonial masters. Having a continent that have the power to share resources, have the zeal to support our heritage, have the zeal to ensure that we value the historical spaces that we have, an Africa that knows that its belly is rich when it comes to mineral, and through its mineral we can together support the demand of our citizens at different levels, and a continent that believes it is not poor at all. Is the one that is supporting other continents when it comes to the issue of such as oil, such as the issue of minerals, diamonds, and everything that we have. So through the spirit of Pan-Africanism from Kwame Nkrumah, from Thomas Sankara, from the African leaders, the Julius Nyerere, Nelson Mandela. There are a lot of leaders that have their spirit of ensuring that Africa realizes its potential, that it is able to transform and reform the vision that it has through focusing on giving the generational talks to the young people to know that we are here to take over and we are here to reform and transform what belongs to Africans through reading history and also building the unity amongst us, removing the borders which were created by through creating our personal support system as Africans. That is Africa that I look upon, that it's possible for us to reunite through focusing on what build us than what divide us, through building the political systems and also focusing on the economical growth. Thank you so much.
Thank you immensely, Mr. Felix ORWAKA, joining us all the way from Kenya. Now back over to you, Mr. Gilbert KIMBI. Listen to what your co-panelists had to say as far as today's topic of discussion is concerned. Opening, what's your point of view as far as a united Africa is concerned? That question is directed to Mr. Gilbert KIMBI, who is a specialist joining us this day as far as a united Africa for African people is concerned.
Yeah, talking about the dream of a united Africa, it is all about creating a strong and cohesive continent where all African nations work together to achieve shared goals. So this vision is that of a continent where economic growth, political stability, and social progress are accelerated through unity and collaboration. So let's imagine Africa, as a team in a relay race. What is happening now is each country is running its own race, sometimes competing against each other, rather than working together. So the dream is, for these countries to join forces and pass the baton smoothly and, supporting each other to reach the finish line together. So, for instance, looking at the African Union, which aim is to foster unity among African countries, and looking at some of its initiatives like the AFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is a great example of this dream in action. Despite the shortcomings which we shall be talking about as the program unfolds, this is already a significant step in that direction. If successfully done by removing trade barriers and boosting intra-African trade, the AFTA will help African nations, to strengthen their economies collectively together. So coming to my field of expertise, the digital space, digital technology can play a big role in Africa's unity and can further realize through shared digital infrastructure and standards. For example, creating a unified digital payment system across the continent will make it easy for businesses and individuals to trade and transact. So just like how mobile money platforms like the M-Pesa have revolutionized financial inclusion in Kenya, this is what investing in the digital space can do. So a united Africa in the digital age means harmonizing policies, investing in technology, and fostering innovation across borders. So by working together, I believe African nations can build a digital ecosystem that supports economic growth, bridges the digital divide, and improves the quality of life of all Africans.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kimbi. Now, I'll direct this next question to you, Dr. FONGOD. You listened to your co-panelist, but he emphasized on the African Continental Free Trade Area, and you just reiterate that you are an economist and the CEO of CROSTON FINTECH. Now, do you really think that a full implementation of these agreements that came into full force in 2021, if fully implemented on the African continent, could go a long way in bringing Africans together?
And I think that we are lacking, especially when it comes to the African Free Trade, Continental Free Trade Area. We have literally not done what we were supposed to do. I think that the harmonization of the policies that we enacted to be able to bridge, the gap has fully not been realized. The idea of a shared currency, which is extremely very important, especially when you start talking about us coming together and being able to allow companies across borders, basically, which will be state in this case, across borders to be able to, do business from one country to another with very limited and minimal opposition when it comes to financial and physical and monetary policies. Those things have absolutely, not come into fruition. So on the economic terms, we really need to be able to find ways in which we can be able to bridge this gap and bring about infrastructural development. The gentleman was talking about, the role of technology, which is absolutely needed, because which is part of the infrastructural development. We need data centers. We need to be able to create up an environment in which, even if we're using mobile money as some of the use case might be, we need to also bring blockchain technology as, and implement that as another use case. But none of this stuff is feasible without, data centers and without us being interconnected, through robust wireless systems or telecommunications infrastructures. Either we are utilizing satellite communication or we're using fiber optics, whichever method we are using to be able to reach the end user. We need to be able to set those infrastructures in place so that we can be able to get these things going. I think, honestly, that none of these things is even meaningful or will be done if we really do not begin at the core. That is great. I think the economic front is where we might start, but why not actually do what the EU was set up to do, which was going to be able to create up, a government structure, a governance structure for that matter, that will require all member states to be able, to get into some kind of into a democratic state, which, however we describe, however we define democracy in terms of the African, but we need to be able to define something, all right, so that we all can come together on that front, create up a federal system on the continent of Africa where each state or each member state becomes a regular state, in this union. We need to be, the African Union therefore becomes the federal state, and all the member states becomes, individual states in the union. That is needed. I'm not sure how you're going to have 54, African, states behaving, with such an autonomy, without having a superstructure that governs all. And that literally means with that superstructure that governs all also brings about the extra additional layer, which is absolutely needed, and that layer will become that layer of our governance structure and also our judiciary, because there has to be laws that will govern us that supersede, the state laws, so that the federal laws are higher than the state laws. We need to be able to look into this, otherwise, it's going to be quite difficult. It's like, I know it's like trying to play the piano. You're learning how to play the piano, and then you're singing at the same time. That's tough. We have to be able to go, quarter by quarter, structure by structure. I think that on the political front, that's what is needed. Let the ideas of the African Union, what it was that it was set up for, we need to be able to make sure that we push that. Otherwise, it's going to be increasingly difficult for us to ignite some of the policies that we're trying to, especially when it comes, to the monetary policies, in areas of, and economic policies as well. It's going to be very difficult for us to put those policies, into action. Reasons being, we have to have a unified front that fully understands what the goal is, that understands what the mandate is, and then from that perspective, we're able to roll out some of those other initiatives and then put infrastructures in place to support what is it that we are rolling out.
Absolutely, Dr. FONGOD. Now, to proceed with you, Felix ORWAKA, now, you listened to what your co-panelists had to say, but I'd like to take you, drift a little and take you to the Vision 2063 of the African Union. I remember in line of achieving this vision, the African Union had set out 7 aspirations, which I would like to focus on the second, which was in line with an integrated continent, politically united and based on the ideals of Pan-Africanism and the vision of Africa's Renaissance. We have seen over the years, Africa has been trying, or Africa is in the neo-colonial era, but striving to, conserve, or better say, preserve its own identity. Aside from this, now since 1963, we had this quest for African unity, and it's been growing over time amongst Africans, most especially in this generation, and it has been focusing on the liberation as well as independence of the continent. Now, in that regard, though we're talking of independence, we might be likely to talk about economic independence, because some experts believe that economic integration, economic independence will definitely lead to the liberation of the continent. I believe Dr. FONGOD will share that idea with me. But then, do you believe that a united continent of Africa, one that was like the founders has envisaged for the continent? We had cited Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, we've cited Julius Nyerere and a host of others. Do you think that is still feasible in this contemporary society?
Okay, thank you so much. My apologies, I'll not be able to open my video due to internet issue, and I really want to share my points. So one thing I want to appreciate my panelists at least for articulating it very clear and very elaborate when it comes to the issue that Africa we need as a continent, as well as the vision that you are supposed to have. So allow me just speak in line with the issue of language and those first before any other point. So I believe and trust that when we want a united Africa, we must focus on how best we can create one language that guides us together, that we can speak as a whole. One of the factors that has been limiting Africa to grow or even to develop is the issue of language barrier. You find that we are in one continent, but it's hard for us to speak with our brothers from West Africa because most of them are Francophones, and thus we are Anglophones. So the issue of language, we are supposed to have one binding language, a language which is not based on our colonial, but a language which is based on our collaborate efforts and our culture. The reason why the issue of maybe Swahili being our national language as Africa, this will enable us to trade freely. This will enable us to address issues accordingly. This will enable us to at least know that we are able to support our fellow Africans through the language. If you get it clearly, you will find that even the seat of the AU, sometimes it becomes for the candidates to work freely or to share their agenda freely because of the issue of language. It is hard for somebody to translate. I know translation is there, but do you know translation sometimes leads to omission of maybe important words? But when we have a one language as African, then we are able to have a free interaction when it comes to our border issues that are there. Somebody from West Africa can purchase something in Africa using the language. I think language is very key. And then allow me just speak in line of with the current situation of young people. Whatever I believe is that the current generation can be the hope for the African to unite, because for us we have the past history that we have learned from, and at least the forefathers had the vision of ensuring that Africa can easily interact when it comes to the issue of intermarriage, the issue of maybe the business aspect, the issue of engaging in free trade for us on the best way. For me, what I believe is that when we can define what we want as all Africa and then remove our vision or our focus from the colonial nature of telling us what to do on having the division when it comes to our currency. I think the reason why we find that some of the African countries are poor is because of their currency is so much painful that I live in Kenya. The Kenya currency to dollar is different with Uganda, our neighbor, currency to dollar. So you find that it becomes hard for them to trade with us. So automatically that undermines the potential of Uganda as a country whenever they want to trade with other countries. So when we focus in having one currency and one language, then we are able to speak at one point, because we are looking on Africa that we can share resources and minimize whenever it comes to the business aspect of maybe over taxation to our fellow African countries. So when we unite and have a common currency for an item, it enables us to have a high bargaining power when we are going to trade with other continents, because we are going to give value to some of the items in Africa which maybe never had value. We are going to have a bargaining power with maybe, let's say, the countries that maybe has lended us. You find that the depth within African country is very high compared to other countries. So when we speak of Africa, we are supposed to look on the long-term goal. What's the long-term goal? Long-term goal is the independence of Africa and address the issue of poverty as one of the things which are affecting the African growth in its own nature. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you to Mr. Felix. And now back to Mr. Kimbi. You listened to what your co-panelists had to say, but I would like to emphasize that Mr. ORWAKA was critical while stating that it's imperative for the African continent to have a unified language that could say ease communication and of course could ease integration. Now to you, Mr. Kimbi, looking at the continent as of now, the continent is filled with discord in different areas. We've seen in terms of security, we've seen in terms of say economic imbalances and a host of others. Now, we have cited so far that we have some lapses, that is the lack of a single currency, the lack of a single passport, the lack of a single language, and which is what your co-panelists were stating. But do you equally share the same dream of how feasible, say, the dream of a united or unified continent would be with the slow implementation of some of these projects within the continent, Mr. Kimbi?
Yeah, this is actually an important concern, Madam NJIX NABESEH. It is true, the dream of a united Africa is facing a lot of challenges. Africa is a continent of 54 countries, each of them having different political systems, different economic structures and priorities. So this diversity has led to discord, making it hard to reach consensus, on shared projects. All these have made it difficult for African countries to work together harmoniously. So if these challenges are addressed, a unified Africa is feasible. Let us look into this more closely. Firstly, let us consider the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AFTA, which is an initiative by the African Union that seeks to create a single market for goods and services across Africa. A wonderful initiative, but its progress has been, delayed due to challenges such as administrative hurdles. Many countries face bureaucratic challenges and lack the infrastructure, needed to fully participate in that agreement. As a consequence, this leads to missed opportunities for economic growth and integration in the continent. So, for example, businesses face high costs and reduced market access across nations, which can stifle regional economic development. Secondly, the African Passport Initiative, another initiative that has aimed to facilitate free movement across the continent of Africa. The rollout of the African passport has been slowed due to bureaucratic inefficiencies, security concerns, and the need for member states, to align their policies. As a consequence, it limits the ease of travel and mobility across the continent, which affects business and tourism. So I believe that digital technology can play a crucial role in overcoming these challenges. For example, leveraging digital platforms for cross-border trade can streamline processes and reduce friction in implementation. The rise of mobile technology and digital financial services across Africa shows that technological solutions can bridge gaps and accelerate progress. So while the path to a unified Africa is complex and requires overcoming significant challenges, it is actually feasible.
Yeah, exactly, Mr. Gilbert. Thank you, Mansia, for that response. Now, in a bit to proceed with you, I'd like to take you, Dr. FONGOD. Now, we have cited a lot of points as far as this is concerned, but then we've equally mentioned that some of these, if we're discussing this, is because some of the policies somehow are not favorable to, say, bring the African continent together. Now, in your perspective, do you think that the governance systems that are in place across the respective African countries, because Africa does have, I would like to say, 55 states, but then the different governance systems that do exist amongst these different states, do you believe that they are hindering the vision of a united continent?
Absolutely. And the problem is that we have so many issues that we need to be able to take care of. Otherwise, the notion of actually bringing us together makes no sense, because it will be like trying to mix, brick, stones and mortar together. It's just not going to be that easy. So we need to be able to find ways in which we create some kind of a harmonization across the board, on issues that has to do with finance, on governance and whatnot. And maybe, for example, if you're going to look at something like finance, all right, it is so crucial that we fully understand exactly what we are catering to. There have to be a central bank, and a central bank, which is basically an African central bank. That central bank will set the policies, they will set up our currencies, they will issue the currencies, they'll set up interest rate, they will control the issues of inflation, they'll have to make sure that they manage whatever foreign reserves that that they have, and they have to make sure that they ensure some kind of financial stability, across the board, especially when it comes to member state. The reason for that is because it is not possible to allow individual countries on the continent of Africa, in the name of a Pan-African Union or a federal system on the African continent, and the monetary policies of individual nations are still held by those individual nations. Now, if you're going to dissolve that, we need to actually come where there is a central bank, and let that central bank literally takes care of everything that it needs to take care of so far as our monetary policies are concerned. If not, it will be very difficult to control the issues of inflation. And if this was even going to happen, we have to make sure that member states understand that when it comes to inflation, we have to basically keep inflation low. So currency manipulations, for whatever reasons, basically would have to go out through the window. We must also make sure that the whole entire issues about fiscal deficit, it's totally controlled somewhere at least below 3%. That is, that's to let us know that countries are now becoming a little bit more serious when it comes to their fiscal discipline, that they are ensuring the overall health of their money. And the notion that a nation can just borrow money, just keep borrowing money. And if you have a nation that is borrowing to the tune of maybe 60 to 70% more than their GDP, that's crazy. All right, that makes no sense. So we have to avoid debt that we should not, in the first place, be carrying out. We should not be taking loans from countries we have no business taking loans from. We should not be taking loans when we have no reason taking loans. We have a lot of natural resources that can actually act as a cushion. All right, use them as financial instruments for whatever money that we need, and not just
Dr. FONGOD, please kindly proceed.
Can you hear me?
Meanwhile, we're hoping on Dr. FONGOD to get to us. Of course, we're discussing this day on the feasibility of having a unified continent. We're asking the question, what is required to set the continent on course? Is what noting, like our guests have said, there is this need for a unified, or say one language across the African continent in a bid to foster integration amidst several fields. Meanwhile, there is this need across the African continent for there to be a unified, or better still, a single currency. Meanwhile, we should note that since the implementation of the African continent of free trade area, like mentioned in 2021, there is still a slow implementation, or it to get into full force. And of course, our guests have mentioned that this could not be possible if there is no economic integration on the African continent. While we're discussing this topic of discussion this day with our guests in the studio, and of course, we are highlighting the need for Africa to get independence at several fronts, and of course take decisions that is going to impact the future. Meanwhile, Dr. FONGOD, are you with us? Thank
Yes,
you. You're welcome back. We apologize for the technical hitters. Please kindly proceed.
Oh, okay. So I was just saying that we need to be able to make sure that we stop borrowing money from countries that we don't have any reasons borrowing money from. And it is important that we have to be able to make sure that even if we are going to be able to borrow any kind of money, we need to be able to use financial instruments to be able to do so. And the notion that we are literally ravaging, the continent when it comes to mining, very crude mining processes where the environment is not protected. We have foreign national companies that are coming into the continent and they are mining the kind of mining practices that they are doing in Africa, and in most third world countries you will not find that in developed nations. And the reason is because the environmental protection agencies that exist on the continent of Africa in our individual nations are all for hire. These are men who will look the other way while the environment is literally being decimated. We have to find ways in which we put an end to these practices. Reasons being, long after we have stopped mining, someone will have to farm the land. So in essence, we really must focus on making sure that in some quarters, we don't even have to mine. We can do geological studies as to how much we have in terms of maybe something like gold. We can know whatever the cluster abundance of gold is in the particular environment. We can absolutely now scientifically know what quantity of oil we have in a particular area. We can know with precision, the quantity of lithium we have in specific areas, and we can use, those certificates as financial instruments for whatever money that we need. In that way, we wait for the right company who will abide to the rules and regulations that we will put in place to be able to carry out those mines. Not just a country like China can just come out with Chinese-backed companies into the continent of Africa and literally, go around areas of the continent that is rich in mineral resources and carry out these unhealthy mining practices, destroying the ecosystem and wasting, farmland that might not be good for agriculture for the next 50 to 100 years. That is something that is totally unacceptable. And I think that us understanding these things will be able to help us in whatever policies we try to be able to enact.
About policies, Dr. FONGOD, could these be, because it's often said within Africa that before we try going continental, I think you have reiterated this on numerous platforms. You said that before Africa needs to go continental, they should try tackling some issues like this at the level of policies at a regional level. Now, do you believe that within the respective countries, we can first of all address this issue of governance before trying to look at it from a global, that is a continental perspective?
Absolutely. I think that we have come of age where African presidents need to be able to look more at their countries rather than trying to be able to do the beating, of those who are outside. It has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with the country. And I think that we have to become a little bit more responsible, especially as we lead, knowing mindfully well that we are leaving the country to our children. Okay, nobody's going to be president forever. You can stay in power forever, but the grave will at some point in time says, Lord, man, look, your time is up. So irrespective of whatever, your children, your children would have to inherit whatever were the policies, that you put in place. And whatever was the country that you put in place, that is what you're handing over. If you collected a country that was good, a country which ecosystem was vibrant, a country that had trees, a country with mineral resources, that was healthy, with an environment that was healthy, a country where men and women had the tendency to be able to farm wherever they wanted to farm, a country where the rivers and the streams were not laced with all kinds of hard minerals, mercury, because of the aggressive mining practices that is being carried out across the continent. If you inherited that type of a country, it is your due responsibility to hand something better, not the same, not worse, to the next generation. And I think that unfortunately we have men and women, I think in most part, who absolutely has no idea what is going on. As long as they see the dollar, it doesn't matter to them. They will turn the blind eye and allow these multinational companies to do whatever they want to do. That's something that we have to put an end to. And I'm calling on young people in all African countries to be able to be involved, especially when it comes to protecting the environment. The notion that some countries in the West will be singing this, this kumbaya song about, the environment, protecting the environment, but yet they can only talk about environmental protection when it comes to the West. But when it comes to the African continent, environmental protection is like just some things we say because we are looking for funding. That's crazy. We're talking about, if you look into places like Cameroon, places like Ghana, places like Nigeria, you have rivers that have been converted, into a stream of mercury, all right? Rivers that used to be vibrant with its ecosystem and different species of fish and all of that, but now it's as dead as the Dead Sea itself. All right, so we have to be able to find ways in which we make sure that young people get to understand that whatever is happening in these nations, it's their future that is being mortgaged, at the altar of stupidity.
And of course, that is just to say that the future of Africa is in the hands of Africans. Now, Dr. FONGOD, now we've seen, you earlier on mentioned the issue of the Pan-African passports. We saw the African Union had initially tried working towards, removing these restrictions on Africans' ability to travel, work, or better still live within their own African continent. And of course, we have seen several countries in recent years trying to work towards that vision, towards that agenda. But do you think that this is slowing down the process? And of course, why is it that it's still dragging on up to today? What are some of those issues, those challenges that are facing the full implementation or full-fledged implementation of the, say, African passport?
I think the African passport is absolutely needed. We need to have some piece of document that will allow the African to move unrestricted, across national borders within the continent of Africa. That is needed. I am not sure why we are still even having this conversation many years later. I'm not sure what the policies, hold-ups are, why this is not happening. I'm not sure why African countries will have to continue, continue on this, trajectory of listening to every junk that have to come out from the West. I am not sure why we are still even having this conversation. To have a free passport, to have a continental passport that will allow Africans to move across the continent is good. We are talking about things that will affect the issues of capital mobility, for example, where someone is able to move money from one part of the continent to another part of the continent because they have the capacity to go see and invest and inspect whatever things that they're trying to invest in. They have the capacity to be able to move and say, look, I'm trying to do some investments in Ghana. I'm from Kenya, and they have this unique ability to travel to Kenya with no issues because it's just like traveling within the EU, member countries, or traveling within the United States of America from one state to another. They go see what's going on, set up their deals, and then they're always able to go back and do inspections to make sure that whatever it is that is going on with the companies they've invested so much money in, it's what it is that they agreed on. That is absolutely very important, and this is what we need even to be able to foster the issues of foreign direct investment. If we are going to talk about, basically bringing foreign investors, and if that foreign investors is coming from one African country to another African country, the least we can at least be able to do is to be able to allow them the opportunity to travel, without all these restrictions on visas and visas fees. I think that it is quite crazy for us Africans to be moving from one part of our God-given earth, all right, so far as the continent is concerned, paying money to some country just because we want to move from one part of the land that is indigenous to us. We are Africans, and there is no space, there's no part of Africa that no African should not be allowed to travel to.
Absolutely, and of course that the African continent should be free for Africans. But before we're coming back to this aspect of a single currency within Africa, is what noting that we have discussed this a couple of times, but I think it's what reiterating, is what talking about, and of course I'll be coming back to that given that you are an economist. But then I'll take the view of you, Mr. Gilbert KIMBI. Now, in your perspective, in your own opinion, what parameters needs to be taken into consideration to ensure that this vision, or better say the agenda of a unified continent, actually materializes?
Yeah, to ensure Africa becomes a united continent, three key things are needed: political will and strong leadership, infrastructure development, and digital technology and innovation. First, political will and strong leadership are essential. African leaders need to prioritize unity and collaboration over national interests. So without political commitment, initiatives like the AFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, will struggle. Leaders must work together, promote trust, and align policies that benefit all countries. For example, if African leaders commit to removing trade barriers, the AFTA can boost trade across borders, benefiting the entire continent. Secondly, infrastructure development is critical as well. Africa needs better roads, railways, ports, and energy systems to connect countries and make it easy for people, goods, and services to move across borders. So without proper infrastructure, trade and communication between countries remain slow and costly. So for instance, building modern railways between countries can help move goods faster, strengthening regional economies. So finally, digital technology and innovation can drive Africa's unity by investing in digital structures like high-speed internet and unified payment systems. Africa can create a seamless digital economy. So platforms like Kenya's M-Pesa have already revolutionized financial transactions, like I did mention already, and a continent-wide version could ease trade and increase connectivity. So supporting innovation across borders will also help Africa solve its own challenges. So in short, with a strong leadership, modern infrastructure, and digital technology, Africa's dream of unity can become a reality.
Thank you immensely, Mr. Gilbert. Now, Dr. FONGOD, do you share the same opinion as your co-panelists?
Absolutely. I think that, those are quite important as part of the overall things that needs to happen so far as the continent is concerned if we are going to have a united Africa. I think that, including that, we need to be able to start talking about having an African central bank, all right? I think we have to basically start looking at having some kind of a convergence criteria for member states when it comes to their money so that we can tackle the issues of inflation, budget deficits, debts, and, exchange rate issues that we might be having, so that someone carrying money from one part of the continent or buying something from someone or transferring money to somebody, know exactly what they're going to get, because we already know that there's a little bit more stability, in those fronts. We have to be able to make sure that we integrate the market. And I think that the banking systems, with some kind of an insurance structure, basically putting up a stock market also on the continent of Africa will help us in that regard. We need to be able to understand that we should find a way to make sure that we put up policies that will somewhat control pricing across the board. Reasons being, if somebody is manufacturing something somewhere and they're selling it somewhere else, let there be somewhat a comparative price, arrangement in such a way, not basically talking about trying to control pricing per se, but we should make sure that the price fluctuation is not that high, just so that we can be able to stabilize the economy in that regard. I think it's extremely very important for us to have these mechanisms in place. And obviously, a unified trade is something else that I totally agree on, because if there's a free trade area that allows businesses from different parts of the continent to be able to trade freely with no restrictions, and also allow businesses to have their personnel move around the continent for training and move around the continent to set up different business, structures across the continent, that will basically push the overall GDP of the entire continent, up. If you look at America, for example, all the tech companies are owned in one state, this state, California. All right, it is right in the state where I am right now, California, where all the major tech companies are actually owned. All of them, all the startups, whatever you think about, started right here. Facebook, Google, YouTube, PayPal, the list goes on, right here in California. But when we talk about tech innovations in America, we don't look at California. We look at California to be where it is, but it is to the benefit of the United States. Now there are campuses and warehouses, across this nation, and thanks to those guys in Silicon Valley, with all the tech innovations that they have created, and the world has changed as a result of that. We need to have similar products, similar centers, similar areas on the continent of Africa. I think Kenya is actually leading, Nigeria is, following suit, Rwanda is doing great. We need to be able to have these centers where we have folks who are good at what they do, to be able to spend time, have the funding that they need, create an environment that is quite stable, so foreign direct investors can be able, or foreign investments that are coming in, folks will look at the stability of the market. Because if there are anything that is extremely very important for us to understand is, in the business world, any investor is looking for one thing. The investor is looking for stability. Number one, stability in the market and stability politically. So when I talk about stability in the market, it's that they are looking to see if the nation is really stable. They are looking to find out if the nation is not going through all kinds of war, fighting here and there, insurgency and counter-insurgencies, if you're in the Sahel, all kinds of issues, all right? Civil war left and right. That's something they're looking to make sure that is not existent. But on the substratum, at the basis of it all, they're also trying to make sure that the regulations are not going to change, because whatever policies they are putting in place so far as their business practice is concerned, they are primarily using the regulatory framework that is in existence to be able to do that. Once we have somebody who comes into power and changes everything, then that basically throws most investors upside down. It basically messed up their model, it messed up their companies, because they have to go back and that kind of an environment is not one that most investors want. They want stability on that front, that whatever policies we put in place, whatever policies that we have, those policies will stay irrespective of who is in power. I think those are some of the things that we really need to be able to look at as we try to create this framework to be able to realize ourselves, as Africa that is united, Africa as a united Africa, rather than the disjointed, nations we have, everyone trying to do whatever they can for themselves.
Absolutely. And of course, you cited investment. Just to note that we have gurus, economic gurus on the African continent, or better say economic giants. Now, Dr. Fongod, you mentioned this issue of political stability. Aside that, we equally have security challenges that are plaguing some countries within the African continent. Do you believe that this could equally be a hindrance as far as the vision of a united Africa is concerned?
No, I'm looking more into what's possible rather than what I'm looking into what can be rather than what is not. And I think that the issues with those infighting that we have on the continent of Africa gives us more reasons why we should be able to bring this continent together as a bloc, to bring this continent together so we all can unite on the common front as Africans. Most of the cases why we are fighting is not even because you are fighting another African. Yes, for sure, you have a gun pointed on the head of another African, but you are going to pull the trigger. But the reasons why you're going to pull the trigger is because there is somebody in your ear telling you that that African is useless. And most likely the person who is giving you that idea is someone who is coming from the West, is somebody who is coming from the East. We on the African continent do not manufacture the amount of guns that we have on the continent of Africa. All these missile tanks, all these rocket-propelled grenades, that we use on the continent of Africa, AK-47s, none of those stuff is actually manufactured on the continent of Africa. What happens is diamond, gold, and oil and all those fine minerals that the West needs get shipped out, and what comes into the continent is what we need to kill ourselves. They take our gold, they take our diamonds, and then they carry all of our sweet minerals out of the continent, and then they give us guns in our leisure times, to point at each other and then kill ourselves, all right? So we are so dumb, so stupid, on the continent when it comes to this, that I don't just know how you can help the African, decolonize and basically remove this very useless satanic ideology that we have on the continent of Africa when it comes to us taking care of one of our own, as our own brothers and sisters. You are one another's keeper as a black man. If you think that you are any better, leave the continent of Africa and show up anywhere in Europe. I don't care where you go to Europe. Just show up anywhere in Europe and see the blatant racism that you will face while you're in Europe. Go to places like China and see the blatant level of racism that you will face once you show up in China. Talk less of India, all right? People like Gandhi themselves is on record calling black people chimpanzees, and it is such a shame that Martin Luther King, museum right here in Atlanta, Georgia, has a statue of Gandhi as if to say he's some kind of a hero. I don't know exactly, what an insult that is. Thank God to those boys in Accra, Ghana, that was able to topple that statue out of their university, because there is no place for that level of bigotry and racism. But the issue is we Africans are far more racist to our own than anything else. That's the reason why the infighting continue. They tell you that the reason why you're doing this is because of marginalization. Well, the issue is, if this is marginalization, we'll find a better way of talking about this than literally wiping out our own population, because we need this population to build a robust front. The people you are killing, those are your doctors. The people you have murdered, those are your lawyers, those are your engineers. Now that they're gone, you're going to have a free Africa still living, in the third world situation. That is crazy. We have to do better as Africans. We must think differently as Africans. And unfortunately, the dollar speaks better things this day than common sense. It speaks better things this day than reason. And I've always said this, that the united Africa is possible, a united Pan-Africa is possible, but the more predictable obstacle to a united Africa is that there is always a Negro who is willing to sell a brother for $1. And so there goes the problem.
Absolutely, and of course it is a situation, but then that's why we host programs like this to edify the African populace. Now, Dr. FONGOD, given you are an economist, or better still an economic expert, you cited earlier on the issue of a single currency, which I mentioned we're going to be coming back to it. You mentioned that amidst all this, Africa, or there is this need for Africa to have a single currency. While the continent is advocating for economic integration, economic independence, so you can be able to say have some weights at the international arena of how important, of what need, or how imperative is it for the African continent to have a single currency. And given that this project has been dragging on for so long, what is needed, or what needs to be taken into consideration for this to actually become a reality?
I think that there has to be a common financial regulatory framework, and that can only happen if there is an African central bank. And the reason for that is because there are so many things that needs to come together, so many things that must be implemented in member states, so that that united, front, especially when it comes to our currency, is possible. If you have a common currency, if you just roll out a common currency on the continent of Africa right now, and then just ask different countries to be able to use that particular currency, we'll be in trouble. When I say big time, when I say trouble, I'm talking about a big time trouble. We'll have all kinds of issues. And the reason is because, first of all, will be the issues of inflation. You have countries on the continent of Africa that are, and just like out of Africa, and we can look at China, for example, that manipulate their currencies daily, and they do all kinds of stuff. And the reason for that is because they're either trying to be able to, for debt purposes, or making sure that it is totally impossible for other countries to be able to sell products into their own particular market, so that they just becomes primarily an export nation. All right, so they export every single thing else, and it's so difficult for other countries to send things to the country. In that way, the local market has zero competitions from folks who are from the outside. On the continent of Africa, once we become one, we are one. So we have to be able to make sure that those policies are put into place, so that no particular country, manipulates its own currency, because that will affect the top currency, which will be the Pan-African currency that we're looking at. There has to be the issue where we also deal with our budget. I think that a budget deficit on the continent of Africa is something that we have to look at clearly. Reasons being that these also will have to tie into the issues of the public debt that we have. You cannot just be borrowing. You can never borrow your way into prosperity. I think it is crazy. The notion that you can borrow your way into financial freedom makes no sense. If you have a country which, budget deficit is at least about 3%, that basically makes sense. I think for me personally, I look at the 3%, mark of the GDP to be at least somewhat of a standard. If the public debt, rather, is anywhere more than 60%, that makes no sense. All right, because now we've basically put ourselves into debt crisis, which means that our currency in most ways will be totally not stable. All right, it will destabilize any currency for that matter, because the sovereignty of the nation, how solvent it is, will basically not be there. We have to go to make sure that we control, these issues. And then and the issues of exchange rate. For example, if you think about why this currency is important, if you have one country that uses another currency, another country uses another currency, there's always going to be the issues of the exchange rate. What would that exchange rate be? That's whatever the market would decide that the exchange rate is. But understand that if you have a business that is in that country, in one country, trying to sell to another country, that becomes a problem, because then they don't really know how much money they're getting back, and it's so difficult to actually even price the product properly, in a foreign market, when you are not fully conversant with whatever that value is in your currency, because you only do your pricing based on cost of production and how much you think the product is valuable. That pricing of the product in another economy, in another country, becomes a little bit quite difficult. So those are some of just the cocktail of issues we need to be able to work on as we try to push towards having a common currency on the continent.
Absolutely. Those are some of the bottlenecks that are hindering this, and of course you've started what Africans need to do. Like your co-panelist, Mr. Felix ORWAKA, had mentioned, like you reiterated on this issue of currency differences. You see, within the East African sub-regions, many countries could be using the shillings, but the exchange rate could be different and vary from country to country. Now, aside from that, all these would surround around solidarity. I think everything brings us back to the Ubuntu spirit, Africans standing as one people, to be able to chart a way forward for what the Africa, or better still, the Africa that they want on the continent. So now, Dr. FONGOD, how effective would solidarity be within Africans? You've cited all these areas, and all these lapses is due to the lack of solidarity, Africans getting to have one single voice. So when we're talking about solidarity, what role will it play as far as bringing the continent together for a common good, a common goal, which is the growth and development as well as prosperity of the continent?
Well, we've looked at economic integration, which I think that's what solidarity does. I think that once we come together as a people, then we start looking at how we can be able to work together, for the common good, of our people, and for the common good of the African. And I think that we really have to be able to bring ourselves together by building up robust infrastructures that will link the continent together, because of course now we are one people. Nobody is isolated. There needs to be a railway station that runs from Senegal all the way to Kenya. We have to be able to find ways in which we build some kind of a railway track all the way from places like Tunisia to Lagos. All right, we just need to crisscross the continent and basically allow the continent to espouse her ideals and be able to enjoy and allow the continent to be able to flourish in the 21st century. the continent has been limited in more ways, especially when it comes in terms of our development. And unfortunately, this has nothing to do with the colonial era. It just has to do with where we are in the world, our vantage point in the world in terms of our topography. So if you look at the continent of Africa, once you leave the coast, places like Douala, Lagos, Nigeria, as you go inland, you rapidly rise. Okay, the sea level the land, actually, as a matter of fact, from the sea level rapidly rises, all right, so in such a way that it is very difficult for vessels to be able to go inland. We do not have any rivers on the continent of Africa that any seaworthy vessel can actually come inland. All right, if you look at the Congo River, it is a series of waterfalls. If you look at the Nile in itself is not that deep. Okay, you can only get boats to go upriver during the rainy season. When the dry season comes, you know, it becomes so shallow, it becomes a river of sand. We have to be able to make sure that we walk with what we have, and that has also protected the interior part of Africa, because obviously most of our minerals are inland. That has protected us somewhat, from mass extraction, that would have taken place, around the coast. And if you also look around the coast, the coastal cities, you discover that the coastal cities are actually most developed than any other city that's inland. Is because obviously it is a super highway for ships and goods and services and every single thing else. So obviously those economies, those cities, Johannesburg, Lagos, Nigeria, Douala, Cameroon, Accra, Ghana, just look at them, all right? Casablanca, Morocco, just look at all of those cities. As you go inland, the story changes. So we have to be able to build railway systems that will be able to allow the market to move inland, allow goods and services to move inland. I think that if we're able to do that, then we'll be able to develop the continent the way we're supposed to develop the continent. I think that infrastructural development in that regard is needful. It is something that we should do. And I think that railway stations will have to lead the way as much as we build roads. I think railway tracks will carry more goods and services inland than will any trucks do.
And absolutely, and that was going to facilitate the free movement of our people within the African continent. Since we will gradually coming to the end of today's edition, I'd like to get the view of Mr. Gilbert KIMBI as far as charting the way forward for the African continent in a bit to highlight what is needed for Africa to stand as a united continent. Mr. Gimbi, thank you.
Okay, talking about the way forward for Africa requires focusing on three key areas: strengthening political leadership and commitment, investing in infrastructure development, and leveraging digital technology. So first, strengthening political leadership and commitment is vital. African leaders must work together, putting aside national interests for the greater good of the continent. For example, the African Continental Free Trade Area is a huge opportunity for Africa, but it needs political will to fully implement it. So leaders should focus on long-term benefits like increasing trade and boosting economies across the region. Secondly, investing in infrastructure development is essential. Without proper infrastructure, Africa cannot connect its countries and people effectively. So building better roads, railways, ports, and energy systems will help goods and services move more freely between nations. For example, improving transportation links between East and West Africa can significantly reduce the cost and time of trade, making African economies stronger and more competitive. Finally, leveraging digital technology can transform Africa. Digital infrastructure like high-speed internet and unified digital payments, as I keep insisting on, can connect Africa businesses and people across borders. as I keep citing Kenya's M-Pesa as an example which has revolutionized mobile money transactions, a similar continent-wide digital platform can enhance trade and financial inclusion, making it easy for businesses to grow. So by strengthening leadership, improving infrastructure, and using digital technology, Africa can move closer to the dream of a united and prosperous continent.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kimbi. Now, we just got indications that Mr. Felix ORWAKA is back with us. And now, adding your voice to that of Mr. Kimbi, of what importance or how valuable will the Ubuntu spirit be in unifying the African continent?
Thanks so much. For me, whatever I'll say is that the Ubuntu spirit that we're supposed to have, we are supposed now to focus on utilizing it in line with technology now. Due to that, we are in the third phase of the world. Let's say that we have the digital space with us. How best can we use the digital space to ensure that we enhance the Ubuntu in us? We are supposed to utilize the AI toolkit to educate our fellow Africans to understand the language that we want. If we say that as through the gate of African Union, we want to adopt Kiswahili as a language, then we as citizens, as young people, as a society, we are supposed to utilize it by ensuring that we teach each other whatever is necessary, and also we are supposed again to focus on how best can we share the resources that we have with our fellow African countries. The African Union is a mother of change that we want as African. So the African Union should ensure that they provide policy which cut across for the both developed African countries and developed African countries through focusing on how best can they leverage when it comes to human resource. How do we ensure that the human resources that we have amongst us can support us to grow and develop? And also, I'm trying to watch on the issue of integrating different cultural aspects to different countries within Africa. Because I believe that the issues which have been shared with my co-moderators and facilitators are the main key things. But now, what is the strategy that we have when we want to have the same currency as Africa? How long will we wait until we have it? How long will we wait until we teach each other to speak the one language that we want? How long will we wait until we have a policy that regulates the issue of mining of the resources that we have in Africa? How long will we wait until we bring the culture of independency as Africa? So my vision is that if African Union can sit down and discuss on how best we can help in first paying the debts that we have as African countries with the other continents, it will be one of the free methods that we can look forward as African. But what I will emphasize is that this culture should be owned by the younger generation, because the Africa we want is the Africa that the younger generation of the age of 18, 20s, 30s are supposed to know on how best to address these issues. We are supposed to embrace technology, creativity, and innovation of our African continent and ensure that no one is left behind. That means that each and every African country should feel part and parcel through sharing of resources, through at least lowering the issue of removing the issue of visa, and have a visa-free Africa that can enable us to trade freely and also travel freely and learn from each other. Thank you.
Thank you to Mr. Felix ORWAKA, who joined us all the way from Kenya. And of course, now to conclude today's edition of Talking Point, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give the floor now to Dr. FONGOD. You listen to your co-panelists and of course the voice, the points they had to share as far as this is concerned. Now, to crown up today's conversation, what suggestions can you make for the African continent as we venture on this journey of, say, the vision of a unified African continent?
I think that we need to basically set up an African bank, and I think that an African bank and an African central bank will be needful. It will be useful. In that way, we can start talking about finding ways to control inflation, like what's happening in Nigeria. We have to bring about some kind of price stability. There has to be inclusion in the areas of agriculture and financial inclusion as well. We must make sure that we manage our debts on the African continent. We cannot borrow ourselves into financial freedom. There has to be physical sustainability. There has to be responsibility on the physical front. We must do whatever it takes to make sure that that happens. There has to also be a lot of money that is being put into green projects that will help enhance and basically take over our lands from the hands of irresponsible miners. We also must find ways that we can absolutely put money in green projects to buffer the Sahel from the encroaching Sahara. We have to be able to make sure that those projects are in place. There has to be a way in which we fight the issues of corruption on the African continent by making sure that we put out anti-money laundering programs and set up regulations on the continent that has to do with individuals shipping tremendous amount of money out of the continent that they have looted from the government. We have to make sure that we put an end to that. Then there has to be the building of a capital market. A capital market is very important, which is basically a bond market. If we don't have a capital market, there is no way in which small to medium-sized enterprises can be able to have the money they need to be able to continue building and creating a robust private sector where entrepreneurs do what entrepreneurs need to do to be able to build up the economy. The government must therefore be able to create an environment for these small businesses, or small to medium-sized enterprises to strive, and foreign investors to come in and also, put in their money. I think finally we must deal with the issues of trade. We talked about that. FinTech has to, we must basically look into FinTech, creating technology that has to do with finance. We have to be able to get into the space of innovation. I think that the African has the capacity to solve African problems based upon the fact that she lives on the continent and has experienced what is difficult on the continent and find ways to solve that particular issue. That should be left in the hands of the African, and that would be the best case scenario. For example, if you look at the issues of mobile money, that is an African idea. It's African ingenuity, and that has brought about financial inclusion for people, in most remote parts of the country. And lastly, when I look at young people on the continent of Africa, I see the future. When I look at young people on the continent, I see a robust future. I see a future that looks brilliant, a future that is wonderful. The problem I have is the fact that those who I'm looking up to in relationship to building our future, taking the baton, moving forward, creating a robust society that is meaningful, are the same people who spend most of their times on social media doing things that are absolutely not productive, watching all kinds of junk on television, doing things that are absolutely not productive. We have to do better. We have to believe that what is in our hands are templates, they are building blocks for the future. And each and every one of us was born with that specific idea, with that unique idea, with that component in us to be able to build and push our civilization forward. And you not being your best, it's a problem to our civilization. It's a problem to our growth. It's a problem to our health, because you are the only person who has ever been you, and there will not be another individual who will be like you. You're unique, you're gifted, you are the best version of what you can be, not another person. So the notion that you're trying to look at yourself and compare with another person and say, you know what, I don't have any chance, that is faulty thinking. That is a very faulty way of thinking. You are not supposed to compare yourself with another person, so you cannot abandon your projects, you cannot abandon your life, on the basis that you don't have the same capacities or you do not have the same mandate like some other person else. No, that's wrong. You're supposed to compete with someone. True, you're supposed to compete with yourself, who you were yesterday. That ability for you to measure your progress, to say, I did this yesterday and today I'm better. That's all we're looking for. Small incremental growth that is meaningful. And if that was going to be the case, then I'm hopeful for a beautiful, united Africa.
Thank you immensely. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Dr. Stanley FONGOD, a Pan-Africanist economist and, of course, CEO of CROSTON FINTECH. I equally acknowledge the insightful contribution of Mr. FELIX ORWAKA, co-chair of Kenya Coalition on Youth, Peace and Security, who joined us all the way from Kenya. And, of course, I will not part ways without acknowledging the insightful contribution equally of Mr. GILBERT KIMBI, marketing consultant. Meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being through with us all through today's edition of Talking Points over your Pan-African channel for you Media Africa. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening, and of course I will leave you in company of numerous programs over for you Media Africa.